think really any situation where we're hurt in, there's this assumption that others are to blame. Sometimes when we have a hard time forgiving other people, it's also because we have a hard time forgiving ourselves. Am I hanging on to my idea of how things should have been? Am I hanging on again to basically what isn't reality?
And did you have to forgive yourself for something?
Oh, many things. I mean, I feel like that's it's the root of the spiritual path.
How old were you when your father died?
I wasn't born yet. My mom was 8 months pregnant with me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you grew up without a father, at least
Yeah.
at the beginning. I mean, she remarried, and then
Yeah.
so you had the stepfather, but you never met your biological
Nope.
father.
Nope.
How did that affected you as a person?
I mean, I think when you're growing up, you don't know that it's your normal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like asking a fish what it feels like to breathe water. It's just their oxygen. I don't think I really realized it. I think later I realized it more because I was interested in Dharma partly with an awareness of death.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that came from kind of growing up in the shadow of death. Like death was a topic from the time I was born because it had just happened.
Mm-hmm.
So there's more of an awareness of impermanence and grief. And so I think that helped me pursue Dharma in a way that was deeper than just like a casual interest, because I was always kind of aware you could just walk out the door and never come back.
Yeah.
So then you kind of get interested in, well, what's the meaning of life? You know, what's going to remain past that time? Like what actually matters when something so sudden can occur at any time for anyone. So I think it helped me pursue a more deep interest in Dharma.
Mm-hmm. And how do you know, how did it affect your mother?
You know, I think as you get older and you hit those ages, you understand better.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I don't think it was obvious to me when I was a child because she was just trying to be a kind mother. But I think as I got older and I was hitting the ages she was when she was a widowed new mother, I was like, wow, I don't know how she did that, how she did that. And even it was interesting, recently my sister had a baby and we were visiting her and seeing how much work it is, you know, for her and her husband caring for this baby in the hospital. Yeah. And I was thinking, gosh, how did my mom go home alone with me?
Yeah.
With nobody else to help her.
Yeah.
Like care for me, even just in the early days and weeks and months. Like, how do you do that?
And is your sister older or younger?
She's younger.
Younger. So you were the only child at the time.
Yeah.
That must have been quite tragic for her to be pregnant 8 months, lose her husband, which I would assume she really loved and cared for.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And then come back home to an empty home and now face the reality of, I'm going to bring up this child by myself.
Yeah.
You know?
And also learning when you don't even know how to be a parent and you're being a parent for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think your mom also had some feelings of like, this is a different angle on that, but speaking of like forgiveness and betrayal, right? Sometimes being in a situation like her, getting pregnant with your husband.
You have a plan.
You have a plan, you know, you have a lot to grieve when that plan doesn't happen. Do you think she had some experience, like an inner grief or like feeling of betrayal within that? Yeah,
I mean, she talked about that. She talked about having points where she was angry that he left. Like not being able to admit that to herself, but at certain points admitting like, I'm angry that he left, even though she knew he didn't choose to leave.
Yes.
There is that kind of, you left me with this life that I hadn't planned to do on my own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And within that context, have you, after, you know, becoming an adult and stuff like that, did you revisit that experience for her and then see how her life was shaped?
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps understand like different things. I mean, I think it's more like it comes in little moments where you sort of can exchange self with someone else. Like you can imagine, okay, if I were in her shoes at these points or these ages, you know, even just with the limited experiences we have, we're imagining, okay, if I was in this person's position, how would I take it? And then you just think, gosh, that was remarkably hard.
Yeah.
Had to have been remarkably hard.
Yeah.
You know, and that's coming from a place of not having directly experienced it, but you can still begin to see.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know.
And have you directly experienced betrayal in your life?
I mean, I think it's kind of the whole of life, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's the same betrayals. Like in that case, I don't think she would even say it was a betrayal. It's just like a heartbreak.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, things just don't turn out the way we expect them to, or things happen that we don't think are going to happen, or people act in ways we didn't expect them to act or didn't think they could act. Mm-hmm. So it feels like a betrayal, even if it's not intentionally somebody trying to betray you or deceive you. I think
most of the time it is like that.
Yeah.
You know, people... if you look at difficult situations when it comes to betrayal in life, of course, like we get hurt.
Yeah.
So then it's hard to forgive. It's hard to move on
Yeah.
and move past that. But if you actually check, most of the time they didn't mean it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting way of like, how do we define betrayal? Because sometimes we think any hurt that is associated with someone else or something else is a betrayal, when maybe it has nothing to do with us. Like, it's not personal. It just feels so personal because we're hurt. I mean, I think that it depends upon our own capacity and how much we truly want to forgive. Like, if we're really honestly at a point where we want to change our experience, then I think it is really helpful to reflect on what was my role, you know, or what was my perceived role. Like, be willing to consider the other person's point of view, especially in less extreme circumstances, you know, in less extreme instances of, say, abuse or trauma, like just kind of more run-of-the-mill grudges, you know, or resentments. Then I think it's really helpful to think about, what have I done?
Yeah.
What role did I play? What intentions was I holding? Where did I lack a sensitivity to maybe where the other person was coming from? Or where did I lack an understanding of where they were coming from? Like, basically to see that it's not just one-sided, you know, that there's different angles on it. And from, you know, if I just take the one angle I have, I'm never going to forgive. I have to be willing to consider it from another's point of view, you know, or a different place that somebody might be coming from, where it was my behavior that was to blame.
Yeah.
You know, it was my behavior that wasn't skillful or appropriate or kind or gracious towards them. Like, if I can't see that part, then there's very little I can do to change and improve, not just the relationship, but the like letting go of the forgiveness part, the letting go.
And what is the benefit of seeing your part?
I think then you can learn from the experience, because I think if it's always saying, okay, they've hurt me, then there's this weird misidentification of ourself as being kind of permanently harmed or permanently like a victim. Whereas if we can see a role we're playing, then there's more of a chance we can learn something. And then it's A, kind of ensuring a path forward, and B, like we're getting more information to find a solution. I think the other thing is then we feel that the experience could be valuable because I learned something from it, versus just thinking the whole experience was just pain. You know, it was just all disappointing or it was all deceptive. There's more of a sense of I can pull something out of this that's valuable. I can learn something from it. And then it was actually really useful. You know, it was like that pain wasn't in vain.
Yeah.
It was actually really useful. And then you carry that lesson into the next situation, the next relationship. You're like, okay, I want to approach it differently. Or you can kind of remember that valuable lesson in the way you interact with people later.
Yeah. Do you have any situation in your life that would show us an example of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of different ones. I mean, I think part of it is just understanding, you know, one of the things I've noticed, I've lived in different parts of America, and in America, there's just different cultures, different ways people communicate. And so understanding how when you're from a particular place, you have a particular culture, even though it's all one country, there's different cultures in that country. And I remember moving from the city I grew up in to a city in the middle of the country. It was a very different culture to mine. And in the early months of living there, realizing that my approach to things was offensive to people. So I had an approach of just like asking questions or asking for opinions. And in that place, in the culture of that place, it's considered very rude to just give an opinion.
Okay.
So I was kind of putting people in a bad position by asking them their opinion. And one example came up, and I was sensing something, you know, like that there was some, you know, incongruency with this dynamic, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And it was a time we were doing a painting project together, myself and a group of people. And I had asked them about the paint color. And there was just this strange, like, non-response. And I had a feeling I'd kind of stepped in it, but I didn't know why.
Yeah.
And so afterwards, I was cleaning up, and there was this other woman there who was also from a place near to where I grew up. So it was a little bit culturally similar, but she lived in this place for several decades because her husband was from there. And so I kind of asked her about it, and she said, well, here they consider it impolite or rude to give an opinion. So you asking them for an opinion is putting them in a bad position. And so she said, for example, you asked about the paint, but you already bought the paint. and we're already painting with the paint.
Okay.
So why are you asking? From their point of view, it's why are you asking?
Yeah.
Like, why are you asking? But you've already chosen the color you want. So it was putting them on edge. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then I started to learn how, for them, the way you communicate is you kind of start out and you go in. So it's like you don't ask a direct question like, how are you? You don't start with that. You start with like, how is the job? How is the land? How is your family? How is your health? And then you get to like, how are you? And you don't just ask, how are you? That's rude. And I thought, oh, okay. It's like, it's just learning that they're coming from a different place. Whereas I thought it was kinder to just be direct, because where I'm from, that's more common. Yeah. You know, so you kind of realize like other people are experiencing it very differently than you are. And so that kind of insecurity of like, they don't like me, that's just my point of view. But if I'm really considering the position I'm putting them in, then I realize, oh, that understanding can help me improve.
Yeah. So the difficulty on your part was you have had an experience that these people actually don't like you.
Yeah, or I couldn't really understand. I knew there was some response that was uncomfortable, like they were uncomfortable, but I took that more personally. Like, okay, they don't like me, but I couldn't figure out what it was.
And so there might be a sense of like, this situation is a little bit strange, but then you put yourself in their shoes and you understood, oh, I'm playing a role in this dynamic too.
Yeah, I mean, I think really any situation where we're hurt in, it's really helpful to do that because there's this assumption that others are to blame. And I think sometimes what I thought about is that sometimes that's a way of masking blaming ourselves. Like, so it's safer to be angry at them because really then we'd be angry at ourselves. And that's where I think there's one set of teachings that's really helpful where we try and understand that there's really no one to blame, to be honest. You know, that we always blame the states of mind that are at the root of our faults. And we don't identify ourselves to be those states of mind. So those states of mind delusions, they have faults, and we have the delusions, but we're not one and the same with what we have. So we can acknowledge, okay, I have mistakes, or I've made mistakes, or I have faults, or I have negative states of mind, harmful intentions, but I'm not one and the same with them. And I think sometimes that helps us not just forgive the other person, but forgive ourselves. Because sometimes why we're not forgiving someone else is because we can't forgive ourselves. So we're focusing on their faults because it's a way of not having to look at our own, because we don't know how to look at our own in a healthy way, in a constructive way that helps us like improve and grow. So I think that's where when we get to the point where we're willing to reflect on our own faults in a healthy way, we can be like, aha, I discovered it. Like this is what is playing a role in this dynamic. And then we're free to start changing that. And that feels very liberating. So then we're not afraid to see the fault, because we're not thinking, I am the fault. And then I think if we see that about ourselves, then we understand it infers the same about someone else. I see a fault in them. They're not the fault I see. Like they have it, but they're not it. So it's easier to forgive the person, you know, but still recognize that those states of mind, those deluded states of mind are harmful. So it's not like there's it's not like there's a discrepancy between, you know, it's not that as a result of that, we wouldn't identify a behavior as hurtful, but we just don't think that the person is permanently hurtful. So we can apply that to ourselves. We can apply it to others.
Yeah. And what is because you've mentioned a healthy way of looking at this, what's going on within us, to be able to forgive ourselves. How would that look like?
I mean, I think maybe it's juxtapositioning with what would be unhealthy. So it's like, you know, in Buddhism, we'd say it's unhealthy to identify with our negative states of mind, thinking I am them. That it's healthier to think I have them. So almost like we would feel about a possession, you know, like I have this sweatshirt. And so that means I'm responsible for it. Like it's not your responsibility to clean it. If it's smelly, that's on me. Like it's not your fault, it's on me. So I have it, like I own it, and it's my responsibility to tend to it. But I would never look at this and think me. That would be outlandish. It would be ridiculous to look at a sweatshirt and think me, I. So I think it's that same idea as we think, okay, the different negative states of mind I have, I'm responsible for, and the pain they cause, I'm responsible for, but it doesn't mean I'm one and the same with them. Like that's much more balanced and healthy because it doesn't lead to like a discouragement about ourself or those faults. It's like easier to just acknowledge them, like honestly acknowledge them without identifying with them. And I think sometimes our approach is the opposite. We think to take responsibility for them and own it, we think we have to be it. When the reality is you don't have to be it to own it. Like you can own your pain, you can own your faults without identifying with it.
And so what's the difference between being it and owning it?
I think it's when we actually identify so strongly with the harm, the mistakes, the shortcomings. Like I am mistaken because I made a mistake, or I'm faulty because I have faults. Those are times when I think we've misidentified ourselves to be those things. And then we stigmatize ourselves with them. And then it really limits our ability to overcome them, because we think to get rid of them, I have to get rid of myself, or to destroy them, I have to destroy myself. Like Geshe Kelsang says in New 8 Steps to Happiness, you know, we need to be kind and gentle with ourselves, but ruthless with our delusions. And I think that's like a perfect balance. If you're not kind and gentle with yourself, then it's going to be very hard to be ruthless with your delusions, right? To overcome them. You're going to think, I'm going to be ruthless with myself, think I am my delusions, and then we're stuck.
And then it's painful.
Or we just think it's a permanent feature of who we are. We just think, I have these faults, I am this fault, you know? Or I've made these mistakes, I am these mistakes.
But what if the patterns are repeating themselves so many times that we actually have a valid basis to say, this is who I am, or this is how I am. I always react in this situation. I always push people back. People always treat me like there's something wrong with me because people are unkind to me. On every occasion, every job I go, I have the same problem appearing. It must be me. So what do we do then? Because I think it's easier said than done to say, oh yeah, don't identify with that. But I had like how many years of my experience, life's experience, where people do treat me certain way, or like they are certain way with me, and how can I not blame myself or identify with that?
I mean, I think it's almost like there's a couple approaches to it. I mean, one, in that case, when it's something so repetitive, I find it really helpful to just create the space. Like we have to have some space to reflect upon it, because otherwise, because it seems so continuous, it's hard to see the kind of details of it. So I think that like meditations where like the sky and the clouds, you know, where we do meditation, we think of ourself or our mind as being like a vast blue sky. And the faults and the mistakes and the experiences that are painful are like weather. Because we never confuse the sky as being the weather within the sky. You know, you can have a hurricane that completely obscures the sky, but it still passes and there's a blue sky that remains, and it's not damaged, it's not, you know, scarred, it's not bruised. So I think those kind of exercises kind of create the space where we're still kind of getting a bigger view of ourselves than the faults that we have or the ways that people treat us. And then I think that secondly, we have to distinguish between causes and conditions. So, you know, this is more in the teachings on karma, but I think, you know, like a cause is, you know, it's like, say, if you're growing something, a cause is the seed. Like if you have an oak tree, the acorn is the seed. That's the cause of the tree. That's the main determining factor in what grows. And then the conditions are like the soil and the sunlight and the water. So the soil and sunlight and water can grow anything, right? What it grows is determined by the seed. So you can be in a situation with people treating you a certain way and think that's a cause, when really from the Buddhist perspective, it's a condition. You know, it's the water, sunlight, soil. It's not the seed. The seed is always a cause within the mind. So then I think that when we can distinguish those two things, it's a little easier to see, okay, people could treat me in the way they want. My experience of it depends upon, like what it waters in me, like what it ripens in me depends upon the seed in my own mind. So if I'm not able to see that seed, I'll keep blaming the causes and conditions. Like I'm going to blame the rain for what grows, when really what grows is what's in the mind. So I think that's where another approach begins to distinguish between those two things. Like people can behave any number of ways. What it's stimulating in me depends upon the seed in my own mind. Because if I had a different seed in my mind that was ripening, like in that same situation, if I had compassion coming or love coming or patience coming, my experience would be different. Their behavior might be the same, but how I experienced it would be very different. And I think therein lies a real freedom to change a situation. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about situations where we feel neglected by people?
Yeah. That's a tricky one, because that always comes down to self-absorption, which is a really hard thing to admit. It's like a very touchy point, because, you know, in the situations where we feel neglected, we obviously have an expectation of how others would you know, what's required for us to not feel neglected, for us to feel loved or attended to. Because I think sometimes if we look at it from a different angle, we can see we're far from neglected. You know, we've been given constant care and attention throughout this life to even be here right now. But at the same time, if we want a specific type of attention and we're not getting it, or just from a specific person and we're not getting it, then we can feel like I'm completely neglected.
Yeah.
And so again, we're just sort of like a narrow, myopic view of a situation that's leading to this whole very visceral, real experience of neglect, when really it's just one person not giving us one type of attention, or one group of people not giving us one type of attention, or giving us a type of attention we don't want.
Yeah.
And then therefore think we don't need. But if we check, it's a little bit of an illusion, that neglect. I mean, there's obviously some cases where people have been neglected, but I think in those cases, it's almost like, I would say, for many of those people, it takes them a long time to even realize they were neglected. Whereas maybe when I feel neglected, there's no real valid basis. I can say it's an illusion. If I look at my life from a different angle, I've been constantly cared for and given every opportunity. Otherwise, I wouldn't be alive today.
Yeah.
You know.
And what about children when they're actually being brought up in a neglectful environment? Either emotional needs or physical needs are not being met.
Yeah.
How can a child or a then teenager, when they grew up in you know, emotionally deprived environment, how they can reconcile with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to take a long time, to be honest. I don't think it's a situation that would be remedied overnight. Like, I think it would be something that would require a real skill and a delicacy around. But I think it also would depend upon something that might be quite challenging, which is trying to understand why the people who are caring for them were neglectful. You know, and I think part of why that's challenging is we tend to see people in power positions as having greater abilities than we do, and especially in moments where someone's young, they're vulnerable. But the reality is that people who are caring for us don't have greater skills than we do sometimes. Like, maybe they were neglected, or maybe they had different limitations of their capacity, so they couldn't provide what someone might have needed to grow up without emotional neglect. But again, it's that kind of, do we really want to forgive? You know, because I think we won't be willing to go in that direction if there isn't some real wish to mentally find a new place of relating to that experience. You know, I think that's the real difference in the Buddhist approach to forgiveness, is it's not so much about an outer activity as much as it's a mental transformation of an experience. So it's like, how much do we want to experience that situation differently? Because it's not predestined to be defined in one way. Like, if we change how we're viewing it, it will change how we experience it. So I think that's where we have to be really interested in a different experience of not feeling or identifying ourselves to be neglected. Like, we'd have to be willing to want to have a different, like, to let go of that and have a different feeling of that experience.
Yeah. And how can we even begin to want? Because sometimes when betrayal or neglect or difficult situations, abuse happens in our life, it feels like our mind traps us in this position where this is defining me. I want to keep hold of this hurt because it's protecting me from re-entering situations like that, from letting off the hook people who have not been fair towards me, either my caregivers or, you know, family members or friends or business partners.
It's so interesting, because I think before I found Buddhism, I used to think that, like, forgiveness was sort of like an experience that was bestowed upon me by somebody, like apologizing.
Yes.
Or, you know, a situation changing, or someone expressing a lot of remorse.
Yes.
All of which may not be possible in real life. Like, people may never apologize. And even actually, say someone does apologize, it doesn't mean you automatically forgive them.
Sometimes it feels even worse.
Yeah.
Because then we give ourselves a hard time.
Yeah.
They came, they have remorse, they apologized. I still feel that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that that's where it's kind of understanding that the forgiveness is letting go of a pain within ourselves. It's not to suggest that someone else's behavior wasn't harmful.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we're thinking forgiveness is a way that I'm finding peace of mind, that letting go is for my benefit as well as the benefit of others, but it's not agreeing with anyone's behavior or actions. I think if those things are defined clearly, then we're much more comfortable with the idea of forgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, a sign of real progress would be, or a real sign of forgiveness would be, that we could either mentally recall the situation or person and not have that bad feeling come back, or we could encounter it and not have that bad feeling come back. Like that would be a sign to me that I'd made a lot of progress, that I would feel very confident and encouraged by.
So now the question is, how do we forgive?
I mean, I think that, it depends upon a lot of factors. But I mean, in general, when I think about forgiveness, I think a lot about what is it I'm trying to overcome with forgiveness. So there's some sort of painful feeling. Most often, I would say there's some form of resentment, like a hanging on to a painful feeling. And so that's sort of in Buddhism in the category of anger. Like it's a continuation of anger. And, when we think about anger, we kind of look at, well, why are we getting angry? And one of the common, descriptions is where, anger is a response to feelings of unhappiness. So, say we have a painful feeling coming from, say, someone harming us, either real or perceived. And so we have that painful feeling we're holding on to. And I think that it's understanding that anger is one response to that painful feeling, but it's not the only response. Like there's a whole multitude of responses I haven't tried yet. So it's not denying the painful feeling. It's just thinking, okay, the anger and resentment isn't the only feeling or only way to respond to that painful feeling. So it's not denying that there's a painful feeling, but it's more realizing that one response isn't helping me overcome that painful feeling. Like anger, resentment, hanging on to the past, hanging on to the harm isn't helping me resolve that painful feeling. If anything, it's reinforcing it. It's like getting crusty, getting stuck in that place ultimately. So I think that that's where, when I think about that being the root of the problem that I'm trying to let go of, then it's sort of like, in my mind, I go to the kind of topic of patience of not retaliating. So in many books, patience of not retaliating is defined as like a combination of patient acceptance and compassion. So I think that for me, that's a really good starting place, is I think, okay, what am I not accepting? Like starting with the patient acceptance part, accepting wholeheartedly whatever arises, having given up the idea that things should be other than what they are. So to me, it's like, what have I not given up the idea of? Because in the pain that I'm hanging on to, there's some idea of how things should have been, or could have been, or would have been,
or I wished
had been. Like the if only it had gone like this, or they'd done that, or things. And I think that it's not realizing that in that place of non-acceptance, there's no answers, because it's so interesting, that description of what patient acceptance is it's saying giving up the idea that things should be other than what they are. And it's like, well, why would I do that?
Yes.
And it's just the simple reason, because they're not. Like things aren't other than what they are. It's just the reality it's not that it's good. We're not pretending, oh, it's wonderful that this happened. It's just recognizing that is what happened. Like that is how things are. So it's like kind of that idea that it's not about things being ideal or perfect. Like patient acceptance isn't sort of saying everything's wonderful and we're being pretentious and pretending, oh, it was wonderful how they acted. It was wonderful that they betrayed me, cheated on me, lied to me, hurt me. Yeah. It's just accepting what is, which is they hurt me. Well, that's how we're seeing it, right?
Yeah.
And then the second part of that description is through giving up the idea that things should be other than what they are. So that there's the method, which is every time you're like facing that painful feeling, thinking, am I hanging on to my idea of how things should have been? Like, is that what's happening? In the moment that pain's ignited and that resentment's like being fueled, am I hanging on again to basically what isn't reality?
Yeah, it's some sort of wishful thinking. Yeah. Now that you're unpacking this definition of patient acceptance, it seems like we sometimes have an idea of how we would like things to happen, and somehow in holding on to that idea, we are causing ourselves pain.
Yeah.
And it's some sort of like holding on to an illusion of our own unfulfilled wish.
Yeah.
And then you're presenting it. So, to start to forgive is to look at it and understand, give up the idea that things should be different. This illusion that I wished I had a childhood like that, or family like that, or friendships like that, or the boss like that. Give up the idea. This is an illusion we are trying to hold on to. But
it's also mixed in there is not thinking that idea was bad. Like we may have had very good ideas.
Yes.
Amazingly good ideas about how someone should have treated us, or how our childhood should have been, or what should have occurred. Like those are great ideas, but we just need to reconcile with what the reality is that we're facing, which is that wasn't the case. And I think therein lies the pain that we actually have to look at. And I think that's what's also interesting is this idea of impatient acceptance, that we try not to panic. We accept the experience, we experience it, investigate its nature and where it comes from. Unless we start to accept that pain for what it is, experience it, we can't investigate it and see where it comes from. Because we're just sort of focused too much on what coulda, shoulda, woulda been. Yeah. And then blaming them for why it's not. Yeah. And then there's no peace there. We're just like stuck in this dead end.
Would you say that happens in a meditation practice, or is this something that you can just kind of allow organically to happen?
I mean, I think it takes some familiarity. So we can get familiar in meditation for sure. And I think that's often a safe place to do it, because it's just the quiet of our own mind. We don't have to be facing that person or facing the situation head on. We can, like, in a quiet space where we feel a little bit more self-reflective and some freedom to explore, we can do it in that context of meditation. But I think also, if we're familiar with the idea of it, training in daily life as like what do you call it? Like a dry run, where we're trying to accept smaller experiences of harm or smaller experiences of upset or pain. We're like building that mental muscle. And then we can kind of address the bigger roots of some kind of resentment we're holding, because we've built up an experience we can then draw upon for the harder cases. And that could be informal, in daily life. But I think that the beauty is more that it's not the action that is patient acceptance. It's not the action that's forgiveness. It's the mind. And then if we've addressed the mind, then we're free to perform any number of actions to try to address this situation in a constructive way, a beneficial way. There's no set look of, like the behavior of a person who's accepted. Somebody who has deeply accepted adversity could still be being very proactive in trying to solve an outer problem. They're just coming from a very different place.
Yeah. And can we forgive when we are not ready?
I guess the question is, what do you mean by not ready? Because if we're wanting to forgive, then there's some readiness, right? So I guess it's like, I think maybe it's understanding that's a process. So there might be a process of being ready in a moment and then hitting a wall. I mean, like, okay, this is as far as I can, do it with today or in this situation. But I would say if we're even endeavoring to practice forgiveness, there's some part of us that's open to it. Like there's some part of us that wants to be in a different place with a situation. And then maybe it's more of a process of like accepting that it's going to take time. Like that if something has really had a very deep impact on us, it's not that forgiveness is going to happen in one moment. Like we're just going to have this epiphany moment and like we've forgiven. It may be a process of forgiving every day, little bit by little bit by little bit. And then we find ourselves being more and more genuinely free of those painful feelings or those resentments or those blame. Like we're finding maybe we even start to think about them in the situation with more compassion. We just have these little insights and little improvements. But I would say if it's something very deep, we have to be patient with the time it takes to genuinely forgive. Yeah. I don't think it would happen in just one meditation, for example.
Yeah. What's the difference between genuine forgiveness? Like when do you know? How do you know you forgave someone?
I mean, for me, I gauge it based upon the positive feelings I have in my mind towards them. So if my mind is still icy, then there's a lack of forgiveness. If there's a real genuine comfort with the thought of them or the presence of them, or in recollections of what occurred, then I would say that's genuine forgiveness. So there's some peace of mind, and a letting go. Or again, to me, also an indication of understanding, like kind of in line with compassion. Can I kind of understand why a person is the way they are, where that's coming from? That understanding kind of lends itself to some compassion. So then maybe when I'm thinking of that person, especially if a person's repeating certain behaviors, like their behaviors remain the same, does it stimulate anger or compassion? I feel like if it's stimulating more understanding and compassion, that's a sign I've made progress with forgiving.
Mm-hmm. And so what would be if you could paint a picture for us of following the path of not practicing forgiveness and following the path of practicing forgiveness.
Yeah.
How would you describe those?
I think that's a beautiful example, actually, is to ask ourselves, what would it look like fast forward if I don't practice forgiveness? Because I'm sure probably most of us in our lives have met people that have a lot of bitterness. And I've often thought, nowadays when people start school and they're in kindergarten or first grade, their parents have them hold this little sign what I want to be when I grow up, astronaut, firefighter, whatever. Nobody has a sign up that's bitter. This is my plan when I'm older, is I just want to be bitter, resentful. But yet that can happen. I think many people meet people at different points in their life that they just seem bitter. They just seem bitter. And it's sad, right? It's sad to see that. So then you think, okay, if I don't practice forgiveness, what does that path look like for me? Where is that going to take me? Because that's the path I'm taking myself on. So what does that look like in me in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, on my deathbed? And is that really the life I want to live? Is that really the person I want to be? And I think sometimes that fast forwarding into the future can have a powerful impact on right now, which is okay, I'm at the beginning of this road. Even if it feels like I've been going down this road for a while, I'm still at the beginning. There's a fork in the road. I could choose a different path. And that kind of creates more inspiration, I would say, to want to make efforts to move in a different direction. Because otherwise, we're looking at a future that I don't think we really want to live.
And how about the other scenario?
Remind me of the other scenario.
Where we are actually practicing forgiveness.
Yeah, we're actually practicing forgiveness. I mean, again, I think that takes some imagination of okay, can I imagine myself having let go of this or having forgiven? What does that look like? And it is a version of myself that I want to see or be or exist in. And this is, again, where I think it's really helpful to see other examples of forgiveness. I remember coming across this website, and I know I'm not to advertise websites, but there was this interesting website that I found some years back. Somebody recommended to me. It's called the Forgiveness Project. And basically it's really profound stories of people that have forgiven other people for really extreme things. And I found it really fascinating and very inspiring to read people describe letting go of very serious harm that they received. But I think what it starts to do is it creates, when we see other people having done that and made progress with it, we can create a vision of ourselves doing that and what that would look like and what it would be like to lead a life where we can't change the past harm that occurred, but it's definitely not defining the life that we're leading and where we're going. And I think that inspiration kind of create versus I should forgive, right? It's more I want to. I want to. And I think that's what kind of looking at a different path of forgiveness does, as we sort of envision a version of our life in response to those events that is far more positive and inspiring and uplifting, where we're not really being held back by it. Maybe the harm we received has actually been a powerful instigator of changes and lessons and qualities that we wouldn't have had otherwise. I think that's where we kind of come full circle and really do genuinely find a peace with, when we can see, all right, I experienced this harm, but I really grew from it and I learned from it and I became a much better person because of it. Then we're, again, not preferring that harm occurred, but we can be thankful for it. That would be a full circle, experience. We actually feel I'm thankful I had that experience because of all of the beneficial effects it's had since.
And can we forgive people who did not apologize or change their behavior or
I think we
make any
have to,
amends?
because that's going to be a majority of the cases, I think. If we're honest, because we could feel harmed by any number of things throughout our life. So I would say in most of those situations, we aren't necessarily going to get an apology or a genuine remorse. Even if they feel it, we may not see it. Or, they're just quick passing relationships. Someone harms us in public and we're not going to see each other again. Or just people in our lives that they pass away or, change circumstances. There isn't the chance to reconcile. But I do think that is the beauty of forgiveness, is that it's something we do. It's not something they have to do. It's our choice to forgive. It's not dependent upon them. It's not even dependent upon their being any different. It's us choosing to let go of that resentment.
And what is the role of compassion in forgiveness?
I mean, I think it's an essential role in forgiveness, genuine forgiveness. That we have an understanding. But again, I think this is I feel a little bit like I'm treading into deep water, because I think it depends upon how severe the harm is. Like, I don't think it's sort of a tall order. Let's just say it's a very tall order if it's something very significant or serious. I think to get to a point of having compassion for someone who has harmed us very significantly or deeply, I think it's even described as requiring a high degree of mental preparation, and spiritual realization. So I think we can't expect that of ourselves right away. But I do think that maybe in smaller instances, it's easier to build that familiarity where we think, okay, can I begin to consider the suffering of this person? Because people who harm are not harming because they're healthy and well and happy. There's no, if somebody's perfectly happy, they're not going to intentionally harm someone else. So it indicates a pain within that person if they're being harmful. And seeing that pain can create like a compassionate way of thinking. I was thinking about this with respect to like people who are really good with animals, who are a little bit aggressive. Part of why they are really good with animals that are aggressive is because they understand it's not that aggressiveness is masking something else. So often fear, for example, like if an animal that tends to be aggressive or bite, oftentimes it's becoming from a place of fear. And the people who train that animal have to have that awareness. They're not just like trying to change the animal. They have to address why that animal is being aggressive in the first place, which is they're coming from some place of fear or pain. So then they can address that and train them to be different. So I think it's not dissimilar in a way. I mean, we can't train other people, but I think that helping ourselves to understand they're in a place of pain when they're performing those actions can lead us to have a different way of seeing the situation, and then it becomes a different reality. Like we talk about this a lot. Often, we understand somebody who's abusive was abused. Somebody who bullies was bullied. Like we kind of get this, in society. So if we can kind of connect with the reason behind the behavior, we're not agreeing with the behavior or approving of it, but that reason can allow us to feel more compassion for them. So even if we're acting to sort of say this has to stop, we can be doing that not out of an anger or retaliation. We can do it out of compassion.
Yeah. And is there anything that comes to your heart right now that you would like people to understand about forgiveness?
I think there's also a real value in learning to forgive ourselves. Because I think sometimes when we have a hard time forgiving other people, it's also because we have a hard time forgiving ourselves. Sometimes people mirror us, like we see ourselves in other people. And so maybe we're angry with them, but maybe inside we're also angry with ourselves. So I think there's a real need to also learn how to forgive ourselves. And in Buddhism, there's a lot of teachings on how to do that we find. And, that same kind of theme of distinguishing between ourself and our own delusions. Like, so we can acknowledge I have mistakes, I've made mistakes, but not think I am those mistakes. So then we can be patient with ourselves, but still be really trying to change and improve. Versus the extreme of I have made no mistakes. Like we're in denial. We're like, no, I'm perfect. It's all them, right? It helps us to have that healthy sense of accountability of and responsibility for our own actions, and wish to improve, but not in a intolerant way, like hating ourselves into trying to change. That doesn't work. But I think still recognizing, there's room for improvement. I need to improve. These are ways I was unskillful, or these are ways I was hurtful, or these are ways that I created problems for others. And then we have that kind of humility to learn from those experiences and an openness to see I need to change, but not coming from a place of hating ourselves. Yeah. Coming from a place of actually believing we have the potential to do better.
Yeah. And did you have to forgive yourself for something?
Oh, many things. I mean, I feel like that's the root of the spiritual path. Yeah, it's because we're seeing, if we think about like mind training, so much of it is looking at what we want to improve and change. And it has to be done in a really delicate way where we're at the same time recognizing and believing in our potential to be better. But that depends upon an acknowledgement of where we're falling short. I feel like that's a daily practice of training the mind where in the process of trying to improve and perfect certain qualities, we have to see where we're lacking them. And we have to do it in a healthy way where we're not beating ourselves up for them, but we're acknowledging them, and harmful actions we performed in the past, we're trying to purify them, purify the karma we created. We understand like there's a consequence of my harmful actions, that just denying I performed harmful actions has no benefit to me or others.
Sometimes when we are in a situation where we have been holding on to resentment for many years, and then maybe we encounter a podcast like that, and we're like, okay, maybe I should, maybe not should, but maybe I want to forgive. Yeah. Maybe I want to start this journey because I've seen it's hurting me for a very long time. But it is a little bit like a can of worms that we are trying to open. There might be like years of different feelings and then situations that we're adding on. Like, what do we do if we kind of start to open this can of worms? And it's a little bit scary to even look in there. Yeah. What can we do then?
I mean, I think that's where it's more taking it, like even if we see it's a big project, taking it piece by piece. So just starting with today or right now, like, can I work on what's arising in my mind right now? Or today, or in this moment, in this situation, versus thinking, we know there's a lot there. Like there's a lot of worms in that can, as you said. But it's just thinking, okay, how do I address this one that's coming up for me today? And then piece by piece, it's like they have this sort of advice if you're like cleaning out a big garage that's full of stuff. You can get overwhelmed by this garage packed full of stuff. So a lot of times, like they'll sort of advise you if you're doing that kind of cleaning, like, okay, take a section by section. 2 feet by 2 feet. And then if you approach it that way, eventually you're clear out the whole garage. And I think it's the same if we see there's a legacy of resentment or a legacy of feeling harmed. It feels like a big project. And we're likely to like open up that garage and be like, nope, and just shut it. Yeah. And instead, I think if we feel like, okay, I'm just going to take little by little, like in this moment I'm seeing I'm harboring some resentment. Let me just work with that and make a little progress with that.
But what if we start little by little? We go one drawer by one drawer. We go into the half of a garage, but we look back and the drawers that we cleaned are messy again.
Yeah.
Like, because we might have the habit to feel particular way or think particular way about this person and stuff. What can we do not to reverse when we are on this journey of forgiveness and so on? How can we prevent the pattern of repeating itself?
I mean, I think a big part of that is not allowing ourselves to feel discouraged when we observe that. That oftentimes what gets us to really backslide completely is discouragement. When we see, oh, I filled the drawer again, and then we feel like, oh, I must give up. There's no point, and we get discouraged. Yeah. I think it's more recognizing the strength behind the efforts we've already made. Like we're relating to a strength within ourselves that has cleaned out that drawer once before, and we can clean it out again. And actually, it'll be easier the second time because we already have a wealth of experience to draw upon. So rather than feeling like that habit or that kind of reoccurrence is a bad sign, we try to rely upon the confidence that we can overcome it again, and it will be quicker and easier the next time. Because it really is just about forming new habits. It's just repetition. And as we know, with anything we've got mastery over, it's been repetition, familiarity, and then we get better and better. It becomes more and more natural, it becomes quicker, smoother. Part of it's just learning the nuts and bolts of how to do it. And I think that's the same kind of thing. If we forgive, small situations, small moments, then taking on bigger pains will be daunting at first, but we'll get stronger in it. And I think there's a point where it becomes a little bit like a game. Like we're confident, like, ooh, okay, let me see if I can open the next drawer and like address that. It's almost like we're coming from a place of confidence and kind of cleaning that up versus a place of overwhelm or there's no chance, like we don't really believe in our ability to let go. I think it's more seeing the signs we have let go in certain situations that gives us the confidence, and we have to turn to that to keep going forward. We call it in Buddhism armor-like effort, where we just decide to pursue a positive goal and we never give up no matter what hardship we meet. I think that's a real necessity in forgiving.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank
I
you,
absolutely
Agnes.
love this conversation.
Yeah, it's a great topic.
Yes, and I hope our audience will be able to benefit from that greatly.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.